It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to talk about two, not one, but two of the biggest stars in MMA. And one of them fought last week at UFC 307. The other one is fighting next week on PFL's Battle of the Giants cards. Yes, we are talking about Alex Pereira and Francis Ngannou. But first, let's check in with John and see how his week has been.
Oh, good. I'm tired. Went for a long bike ride to my old childhood home, which has been torn down and replaced by a mansion. But besides that, I'm doing good.
A mansion. You should go in there and just demand to take over. This was my childhood home.
I almost did. It's just bizarre. You're on an old, the post World War II little box houses.
Mm-hmm.
The whole street's them, and then there's two houses been knocked down, and behind where my house is, just a giant house now sits.
Wow, that's weird. That's
very weird.
When they take a neighborhood and they just put one badass house in the middle of all the rest of the little cracker box houses.
Yeah, well, I think it's slowly, because the neighborhood around it's got tons of huge houses. So I think they're slowly encroaching in this area. But do you ever remember the movie Point Gross Blank?
Yes.
Or Gross Point Blank, that movie?
Yep.
You remember he goes to visit his childhood home and it's not like a 7-Eleven?
Yes. That's the one with John Cusack where he's like the assassin or something.
Yeah, he's in the feud with Dan Aykroyd as the assassins. But it reminded me a bit of that. Can't go home.
Oh, they're gentrifying your neighborhood.
Well, it's long past gentrification, I think, at this point. they can do whatever they want, that neighborhood. I'm long gone.
Long gone. Well, I'll tell you what is not long gone, and that is Alex Pereira. And this man, I mean, I have been following him with a very close microscopic lens for a while now. I bug you all the time, and I'm so happy we finally get to talk about him because the UFC seems to be using and abusing this man. He has fought 4 times in 11 months. First of all, I need to get your take on that. What do you think about the UFC? Just every single time they need a win, they go to him.
Well, I think it's, they go to fighters that are willing to fight a lot, and he is willing to fight a lot. And more importantly, he's a champion willing to fight a lot, and they need champions at the top of their pay-per-views. So he's going to be in high demand there. So I think it's just, I think almost any champion, I guess not almost any champion, because there's some champions that are kind of negative charisma, but almost any champion, but especially one that there's some fan interest. If you're willing to take a late replacement fight, they will book you as much as possible because they're constantly needing to fill up pay-per-views.
But Alex seems kind of special. So I guess my next question is going to be, how do you explain his meteoric rise to stardom?
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating because in some ways you wouldn't peg him as a star, right? It's like when he first started, I noticed that he wasn't gaining a ton of traction, right? He doesn't speak English. He's not super handsome. He's not glib of mouth. He's not.
Wait a minute now.
Well, maybe some people find him attractive, but he's not like he's not like what you saw when Roger Huerta appeared. You can understand why they made a big deal about him, right? He's got that. Roger Huerta had the male model. Same with Luke Rockhold. You could present him as the male model type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't have any of that. He didn't even have the appearance of like a Brock Lesnar, just a freak and over him. They just look like comic book characters. He had none of that. But I think what happened is you see a couple things is he didn't follow like the Georges St. Pierre, a handsome man, obviously, but also won a lot and represented Canada. And they didn't have really any stars at the time. So that's one mode of becoming a star. The other is the Conor McGregor. You're just super charismatic and people jump on you. The same as, and then Anderson Silva followed the other path where he just kept winning, became a star. What Pereira did is kind of interesting. You remember, I don't know if anybody remembers this, Pat Wyman, old Pat Wyman, who's long left MMA, but back in the day, he wrote an article about how to become a star for the UFC and MMA, right? And his theory, his formula he came up with by studying all the fighters is the first step is to win the title. Now, Pereira's done this twice, right? So that's that. Step one, he's accomplished. He's become the champion. Step two is to fight a lot while champion. And he's fought not only a lot when he won the middleweight championship, then lost it to Adesanya, but moving up to light heavyweight, he fought now as the champion 3 times this year. So why you're fresh in people's memories of holding the title, he's fought a lot. And then he did the third step, which he has memorable finishes. He's knocked people out. They leave his fights feeling good watching him. And all those 3 things together, you put it together, and I think that explains kind of his rise to stardom. You know, he's not Anderson Silva at his peak. He's not George St. Pierre. He's not Brock. But after Conor, who's not fighting, after Jones, we're waiting to see come back and fight again, who fights rarely, Pereira is in that he might be the 3rd biggest star in the UFC right now. I guess Topuria might surpass him because he's probably big in Europe. My understanding is he's a pretty big star there. But Pereira is probably the next one, especially in the United States with the UFC audience. Now he's not a crossover star, but with that audience. So I think that's kind of explains his stardom. He won the title. He fights a lot. He gives you memorable finishes, and you put that together. You know, he doesn't have like I said the typical charisma, and he doesn't have, we could say, the UFC promotional machine, but they haven't gone all the way like making special packages for him, promoting him. They just keep showing him fighting, beating people up.
He kind of does his thing, though, like after he beat Jamal Hill and he did the thing where he stood there with his hands out like, here, I have served you your entertainment. Are you happy? And he just keeps doing that. And it's hilarious. And at the same time, what an emphatic statement. And then his thing, Chama. Everyone is saying Chama, like he's universally associated with Chama now.
Yeah, so which is interesting, but that kind of shows he's gotten over.
Yes, that's what I mean.
But now that he hit that tipping point where he did all this stuff, people are paying attention to his little antics. But we saw kind of with Anderson Silva, where remember for years people said Anderson Silva's not really a star, he doesn't sell.
That's right.
People find him boring. And then what did he do? He beat Chael Sonnen. He knocked out Vitor Belfort in spectacular fashion. He embarrassed Forrest Griffin. After that point, people were like, I can't get enough of this guy.
Yeah.
And we started realizing the guy was funny and had a personality. He just didn't show it much before. But after that, they took off. And I think, maybe Pereira's like Anderson Silva. I don't think he's the type that can sell a ton of pay-per-views by himself. But right now, he's not getting a big B-side to help him on these events.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see what happens if he gets a big B-side, like when Chael had Vitor Belfort, or not Chael, but Anderson Silva had Vitor Belfort or Chael Sonnen, and then the buys went through the roof at that point. I wonder what happens if he gets the big B-side.
And the thing with Vitor came after the Chael fights, too. It was like Chael made Anderson. But I feel like the other thing that made Anderson is when he started speaking English. And he started cutting promos and hanging out with Seagal and doing just crazy, wild things. And he started landing those big sponsorships. I mean, he had Burger King at one time.
Oh, yeah. And the thing, too, is his stardom, I think Chael helped to start him in the U.S., but when he beat Vitor Belfort was the big MMA star in Brazil at that time. And that, my understanding is that put him over the top in Brazil, as it's not Vanderlei anymore. It's not Shogun. It's not Vitor. It is Anderson Silva's the number one guy in Brazil now.
Dang. And Alex hasn't even had to learn any English to get to the point where Anderson was, right?
Well, yeah, but in some ways, remember, Anderson, I think, hit his stardom even before he started speaking English because of those wins. So I think he's kind of in that position. I think it's like, I don't see him as having big crossover, but if he keeps winning, and that, question is, he is an older guy. We don't know how long this will last. But if he keeps winning, especially if he keeps winning in kind of exciting, just vicious manner, the audience will keep growing. The hardcore audience, the hardcore casual MMA specific audience will be more and more invested in him. And eventually, if he gets the right opponent or just gets to a point where it's just so he keeps winning, eventually it'll spill out to the more general casual.
One last side question here, if you don't mind. Do you think that they're going to continue to keep him away from guys like Ankalaev, who should have been the one to fight him last week, but they sidestepped Ankalaev and went all the way down to number 8. to get Khalil Roundtree to fight him. Do you think that they continue along that path?
I don't know, because one thing is the UFC, they follow model. Now, the business side of them is they continue to do that. There's too much money to make with Alex Pereira right now by putting him in that fight. So on one path, and more than even the Fertitas, Endeavor is much more about making as much money as possible, right? Than kind of preserving the sport aspect. So on one side, you say, oh, they're gonna do whatever they can to make big fights with Pereira and not ruin the train they're on right now, the money train. But on the other hand, the UFC, they do want to kind of preserve the sporting aspect, because they don't want to basically put chinks in the armor of their control of the sport, which is, making sure they control the top guys. They do preserve a sporting aspect meritocracy by having the top fight each other, because they're not concerned the top leaving, because they're both under contract. Whoever wins will still be with the UFC. So they don't want to create an opening where they don't let the guy that everybody starts saying, well, maybe this guy's the best, never get a chance, because then it kind of destroys what they built, is this machine where they always get to keep the number one guy. So it's hard to say. I would not be shocked if they did something to get Pereira one more big fight at light heavyweight with someone else, but besides Ankalaev, because I guess there's just no guarantee he can beat that guy. In fact, you probably favor Ankalaev for beating him, wrestling him to the ground and beating him. A lot of people probably would favor him. So you want, maybe they try to keep him away one more fight, but that's the most they can do. I don't think they can do more than that.
What about, and hear me out, Johnny Jones fights Stipe Miocic, he wins, and then he rides off into the sunset because we all know he doesn't want to fight Aspinall. So then we have Aspinall hanging in there and not really with a good B-side. And here's Alex Pereira, who is ginormous and has made the motions multiple times that he wants to go up and claim a third belt. Could we possibly see that?
I think that's a strong possibility, and that would be kind of the smart move to preserve the money train, because he could go up, fight Aspinall, which would be a big fight, right? Let's say he loses that fight. He can always go back down to light heavyweight and create at least one more big fight. So from his point of view, that I don't think he's concerned as much about, playing the games to preserve his leverage, as much money as possible. He just seems to want to fight. And a lot of Brazilians seem to be that way. They just show up and fight. But that would be smart. And I think, there's two fights. I think they can make two huge fights, right? And one of them is Tom Aspinall, if he moves up to heavyweight, or any other heavyweight. Who knows? Maybe Jones says, I'll fight that guy.
Okay.
Right? That would be massive. And the other one is Adesanya. If Adesanya moved up to light heavyweight. If any of those are possibility, you got to find a way to skip Ankalaev to get those made first. From a money point of view, you want it. And moving up to heavyweight for him is probably the best case, because it's not that he's skipping, he's not ducking Ankalaev at light heavyweight anymore. Oh, he just moved up to heavyweight. I'm not available anymore. So someone else has to get the interim, or Ankalaev gets to fight for the interim, and then he gets to fight someone else if I never come back down.
What about, he has also made motions that maybe I should go down and take Dricus's belt. Do you think that would be a strong enough B-side for him, the going back down and fighting the champ? Or is that not a strong enough B-side because it is Dricus du Plessis?
Well, I mean, it's the history of it's a pretty big deal. If he can't get heavyweight, that might be a good move.
Oh, okay.
Listen, I mean, the one thing from his point of view, the smart thing to probably do, especially if you're like me and you think he probably loses to Ankalaev, the smart thing to do is to talk to the UFC and say, I want to move down to middleweight, fight for the belt, then move up to heavyweight. And we can have three big, just huge fights. And the whole time you're skipping Ankalaev, of course, but you're not, you have an excuse why you're skipping it. You're like, I'm just not fighting light heavyweight. He can fight for the interim belt. And so I think in some ways I would pitch that if I was his team, because it's potentially you get these big fights. And then even if he loses them, always go back to light heavyweight and you have at least one more big fight.
That's a very, very smart plan. Okay, now that I've done all of these side spins here and thrown you for a loop, let me get back to the outline. So, let's talk about how important he is to the UFC's business right now. I know you alluded to some points, but let's just focus solely on that right now.
the big thing for him right now is he gives him a kind of a credible champ, a credible attraction to put on pay-per-views. I don't think he's drawing like massive sales and stuff like other stars. He ain't Jones. We see with John Jones and we saw with Conor McGregor, the gates they could do. He's not like those guys, but he gives them someone that they can put on a pay-per-view wherever they go, and people will be excited to see it because it's a major event. It will sell decent on tickets. It keeps ESPN happy because they're going to sell enough to cross the threshold that ESPN needs to make a profit. They're going to be happy with it. So he's great for that part of it. He also gives them, like we said, he's probably their next biggest champ right now. After maybe Chappelle, like we said, but definitely after Conor and John Jones. And so for their business, he's not a necessity. They could continue going without him, but he gives them that. He puts the little sprinkles on top to make him a much more enticing enterprise when they start selling their pay-per-view rights, because now they're hitting their metrics every time and they can point to that and say, we don't need Conor or John Jones. We can just make guys. He also keeps the Brazilian champ because Brazil's still a good market, and he keeps the fan base happy. So on all those fronts, he ticks it. He's not like this massive star that's drawing in tons of money for the promotion, but he's the perfect guy to keep the money machine going.
How much is he making? Do you think that he's getting fairly compensated for what he makes if we have any of that kind of information?
Well, I have asked around, and I have gotten some numbers from people I consider pretty credible, but I mean, it's not like I'm looking at his contracts. We can't say, but my understanding is when he was at middleweight, he was making over $1 million a fight as the champion. I guess it was the one fight against Adesanya, probably, like $1.5 million, let's say.
Can I wait? What do you think Adesanya was making in that same fight where he was making $1 million? Well,
I have a very good source for that one. And Adesanya is making around $5 million at that time.
Okay.
$4 to $5 million, in that ballpark. He was making like Anderson Silva type money plus.
Okay.
So with inflation, I guess even higher than Anderson Silva was back in the day, but he was making pretty good money, for you. I mean, for me, you look at it compared to boxing again, we always compare to boxing. Adesanya was lowly not paid high because a lot of guys in his position be getting 8 figures every time they fought. But compared to other UFC fighters, he was just behind Conor, just behind Jones, just behind Khabib, just a handful of people were getting paid more than him. So he's one of the highest compensated guys. But Pereira, we all know he got about $500,000 to fight Adesanya, $1 million to $1.5 million, maybe more to fight Adesanya on the rematch when he was a champ. Now, my understanding, when he signed his new contract at UFC 300, he basically gets only $2 million a fight, and to me, that's now maybe he's renegotiated along the way when he does these last minute fights, like, hey, can you throw in a little more? But if that's true, he is criminally underpaid. Because you got to remember, when he fights, they're selling out site fees. They got a site fee from Utah because he draws enough to make sure Utah's happy. They get paid for the site fee. He sells out the tickets, millions of dollars in the gate. They get $20 million from ESPN, so he meets the ESPN obligations. So they get $20 million for the event. You just go down the line. He is, maybe the UFC has contractual revenue for a lot of this stuff, but without him, it's hard for the UFC to, keep their partners happy that they're paying this amount. And so he is, his events are probably generating $40-50 million US. And, if he's getting $2 million, that's kind of sad.
Wow, that is sad. Now, we spun several different fights for him, but I want you to take those options that we discussed and pick the single one that you think will be the biggest fight that can possibly be made for Alex Pereira right now.
I think the biggest by far would be him versus John Jones at heavyweight, because John Jones is the biggest star. The biggest storyline is him versus Adesanya. You could do a rubber match, right, at an MMA after their long kickboxing feud, although it was a one-sided feud in kickboxing. But in MMA, it's not going up to fight, Tom at heavyweight. It's if John Jones wants to stick around at heavyweight, you have the current light heavyweight champion that's been on a tear versus the greatest light heavyweight of all time at heavyweight in a huge fight. And so I think that would be the fight that would sell gangbusters of tickets. And then by that point, if he can win one more fight out before he does that, or even not even one more fight after what he's done, I believe that would be a major attraction. You'd sell tons of tickets. You would sell tons of pay-per-views, although, the UFC's got a contract for that, so they don't get an upside really. But, all the other auxiliary revenue, it would do gangbusters.
Well, there you have it, folks. Alex Pereira in a nutshell. We will continue to update y'all every time we get any nuggets of information on Alex. But right now, what we're going to do is we are going to move into Francis Ngannou. Are you ready, John?
Oh, hell no, but let's do it.
All right. For those of you listening right now, we will be putting specific pages from this that no one else out there has. So you'll want to be paying attention to the actual written post of this so that you can see those documents. Check this out. While being interviewed by Kevin Iole, and also during a recent presser, I think it was after this past Tuesday's Contender Series, Dana White shot down the idea that Francis Ngannou made more by leaving the UFC or by going into boxing. So let's talk about that, what he's making now and what he could have made in the UFC. So the first question I have is, what information do we have to help us determine how much Ngannou would have made in the UFC and how much he did make in boxing and will make in the PFL? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!